Hello, everyone. I am Troy with the Tavern Tales channel, and I feel like I'm at an '80s after school special. We have a very special episode of Tavern Tales today. From Beyond the Mist, we are joined by Knockback from Standing Stone Games. He is the senior content designer with Standing Stone Games, or as I referred to him earlier, the chief lore officer. So I guess before we start, Knockback, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Standing Stone Games?
I expect to get a badge
Oh, good deal.
as Chief Lore
Yeah,
Officer.
I'll do what I can.
Uh, so I've been working on Dungeons and Dragons online for a while, although compared to some of the other people working on the game, I'm a noob because I only joined in 2008. And before that, I worked on other things, including Wizardry 8 for all you old school CRPG people.
Cool.
And I make dungeons.
Awesome. So before we start with anything to do with D&D, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is your favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons?
Actually, I think that is pretty easy. I think it is 5th edition because it is the easiest to get people into, and because you can basically, you could run anything in it. So certainly, if I was like starting a pen and paper game, I would be using 5th edition.
Good deal.
I do love the amount of detail in 3rd edition, both in terms of the ability to build characters and in terms of the lore.
Yeah.
Back in the 3rd edition times, the monster manual would have all sorts of interesting and superfluous facts about monsters that I always found fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I was joking around. I thought, I won't put you on the spot, and make you talk bad about 3rd or 5th edition, even if you agree there, because that, I don't. I want you to be with us for a long time and not get on the cross side of Wizards of the Coast here. So.
I will happily talk trash about 2nd edition, though, if you want me to.
Oh, see, now, no, don't get started now, because first and 2nd edition are my favorite editions. We talk about this on stream all the time.
Okay.
All of us old school curmudgeon players, always like, what we started with. We died all the time and we liked it kind of edition. So, but anyway, that aside, we're here to talk about Lamordia and how you and team brought this into, the world of Dungeons and Dragons Online. And I guess the first question that comes to mind when I think about Lamordia is, of all the domains of dread that are in the Ravenloft world, can you kind of give us some insight onto why, Lamordia was selected? I know there were several different directions that, Standing Stone Games could have made when you decided to kind of expand on Ravenloft and return to the domain. So what made Lamordia stand out?
So we always knew we were going to do more Ravenloft because the initial expansion was very popular with the players, and we love Ravenloft as well. It's my personal favorite D&D setting. But we didn't know when it was going to come back, as a sequel. We didn't know what it was going to be. But then in 2021, see if I get the camera to actually show this. No, I can't.
Yeah.
There we go.
There it is. Yeah.
Wizards put out Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which has a whole bunch of settings for Ravenloft, like dozens and dozens of them, some of which are multiple pages and some of which are just a paragraph. So we went through that and we broke down all the settings to figure out, which ones made sense for DDO in terms of gameplay, and which ones were cheap to do, and which ones were expensive to do, and which ones would players react to, and which ones would they just kind of shrug the shoulders. And Lamordia emerged as the clear winner because it didn't have anything that was technically difficult to do in it, but it featured if Barovia is Dracula, then Lamordia is Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. And what do you do after you do Dracula? You do Frankenstein. It's a classic tale. A setting everybody can resonate with. and also a setting we could do lots with. There are certain settings in Vindricton's Guide which like might work for certain, shorter campaigns or one shots, but are harder to do as a full expansion. Like there's one about a zombie apocalypse, for example, which would make an awesome, one shot or 3 or 4 session pen and paper campaign. But it would be 13 quests of zombies attacking a fortress, and that would get old pretty fast.
All right.
Um, so, but with Lamordia, we could bring in all sorts of different things, like, well, body snatchers, for example, which are a classic piece of horror lore and also a classic piece of real world history. There's more history in this expansion than you might think for something about constructs.
Right. So that kind of leads to the next question. What kind of, once you decided on Lamordia, what were kind of some of the core themes and, motifs that you really wanted to kind of prioritize when you were bringing it to DDO?
So, there are various sources. The main one is the book. So there's a bunch of stuff in the book about Lamordia. On the other hand, while it's packed with information, it is only like 5 or 6 pages. So it's not an entire campaign described in here, just a bunch of adventure seeds of little things like there's the Baron. He was in a terrible accident. He's now a brain in it. Oh, I shouldn't say. Some people may not have played.
I think it's fair. I think it's fair to say, not to interrupt, but I think it's fair to say if anybody's watching this, we're probably can assume that there's going to be spoilers at some point in time. So if you haven't played this content, turn it off, go pick up the expansion pack, get back with me.
So, it mentions the Baron, but it doesn't necessarily say how the Baron relates to anything else. So there's a bunch of stuff in the book that we drew upon. Then there's the classic versions of Frankenstein, the original book, obviously, and the 1930s Universal movies that with Boris Karloff and others that everybody, at least at one time, knew. And even if you've never actually seen them, like that version of the character because it's just part of the culture at this point. And then there are other sources. So, for example, we're in what is essentially 19th century Germany. That's what Lamordia is. And when it comes to the architecture, originally I was going through and I was finding like reference from actual German buildings. But then the new version of Nosferatu came out. And I basically saw that and looked at it and said to the artist who was making the buildings, who is also a huge horror movie nerd, like we're doing that. Just just go watch that. And that is in large part what those buildings are. If you've seen the movie,
I have. That's awesome.
Those buildings.
That's awesome.
Oh, and then and there's certain moments that come that we knew had to be in there. Like we knew we needed to have an "It's alive" moment with the electricity going. We needed to have some corpses stretched out on a slab. I felt there needed to be an Abby Normal joke.
Yes,
being a young Frankenstein fan. So you make a list of things like that, things that you have to be in a pack inspired by this source material.
Good deal. And also, we are streaming this live, so there's chat questions too, and I do see your questions. We're going to try to hit those at the end. So, the only I guess request that I have is we're going to try to stick strictly to the subject of Lamordia and bringing it to DDO, and so far everybody's done that. So yeah, we'll come back to you. I still want you to think I was ignoring you and moving off in my own direction here. But I guess the next question, we're talking about the source material, is anybody that's been following and is a big fan of Ravenloft will know that there are 2 very distinct versions of Lamordia that appear in the lore. I mean, we started off with a lot closer to Frankenstein with Victor Mordenheim and his creature Adam, who was the Dark Lord of, kind of in the second edition when the world of Ravenloft expanded. And then fifth edition, really kind of took a little twist and moved towards the body horror side of it, and you know, swapped Victor Mordenheim with Victra Mordenheim, and then we had of course, we're talking about this. I'm assuming everybody's seen it with Elise with the unbreakable heart and so on. So how did you guys land on one or the other when you were looking at those worlds? I know we have our basis in 3.5. So
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't think there's actually a third edition Lamordia.
no.
Second edition and fifth edition. Um, we have a fair amount of leeway. Wizards gives us a fair amount of leeway. Like if we go to Wizards and say, can we do this version of a monster versus that version of the monster? They'll say, like, why do you want to do that? And we're like, well, it would be easier to animate on the fourth edition versus the fifth edition or whatever. And they'll usually be fine with that. So we did consider both. We did look at both second edition and fifth edition. Second edition has, some fully worked out adventures, but not a full campaign. And reading the adventures, like, I was not blown away by them. They were not terrible by any means, but they weren't like, I have to go make this. And also, Adam is the Dark Lord in that version. The monster is the Dark Lord in that version, which seems a little weird if you think about it, because one of the bigger themes of Frankenstein is that, the monster didn't ask to be born. The monster was made by the scientist, and the scientist has failed to deal with the monster in the appropriate way. If you read the original book, it is largely a book about being a bad parent. And it seems weird to make Adam the Dark Lord. In the Van Richten's Guide version, on the other hand, the Doctor, the mad scientist, is the Dark Lord. And Dark Lord's the way you become a Dark Lord is you make a deal with the dark powers, and you make a deal to do something that is, sort of morally unforgivable. You cross a boundary, and that seemed more interesting. It also seemed more interesting. The thing that is truly novel about the fifth edition version of Lamordia is the monster is not presented as the scientist's child, which, like, in both the Boris Karloff version and in the book, that's like the basic metaphor is bad parent creates child, but rather as another person, that the scientist is in a relationship with on a human level. And what's happening is the scientist is failing to engage with that other person, and in a bigger sense, the mad scientist is turning their back on humanity, what it is to be human, in pursuit of power and knowledge. So that's the sin of the mad scientist, and I'm not talking about just in Lamordia, but in this kind of story overall. The sin of the mad scientist is to turn their backs on humanity first, and prioritize personal knowledge and power. So it seemed like that the fifth edition version hit that better, and I also just thought it was interesting to have the scientist be the Dark Lord. Plus, the fact that the fifth edition book doesn't have any spelled out adventures either, but it had a lot of, as I said, very interesting adventure seeds. So it kindled a bunch of ideas in the minds of me and Artemis to help me with the building the overall story. So we're like, oh, there are all these cool little pieces, and we can connect these pieces in different ways to come up with a cool story. Whereas the second edition version, like I said, not bad by any means, but just wasn't. It didn't light a fire.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's true of Dungeons and Dragons online versions of classic stuff in general. Is we're never going to recreate exactly the original module, both because we can't. Video games are different than pen and paper games. And also because your experience of the pen and paper module is going to be different from somebody else's experience of the pen and paper module. When we did the Slave Lords pack, Severlin went to a player meet and greet and came back and said, "Oh, is our version of Slave Lords going to have that big fight at the end at the docks?" And I was like, there is no big fight at the end of Slave Lords at the docks. There's nothing takes place at the docks. But he'd been talking to a player, and in their version of the pen and paper version, there was a big confrontation at the docks because everyone's pen and paper version, everyone's version of a module is different at every different table. So we like to mix things up. We like to present stuff that hasn't necessarily is like the thing you experienced back in the day, but is not exactly the same. Another example of that is like putting Vecna into Isle of Dread, which it wasn't in the original.
Right. Well, cool. Well, of course, one of the things that came before I guess our first look at Ravenloft was, when we got the Dhampir. And I was just kind of curious if there's any reason why, because you talk about moving from vampires to, the mad scientist and the monster and, the Frankenstein relationship. How did the Dhampir come along in that discussion?
So we talked about it, and there's like a construct-ish. The Van Richten's Guide contains various player character quote-unquote races you can be, one of which is like a hag-like, another one is a construct-like, and the other one is Dhampir. And we talked about doing each of them, and basically talking to the systems people. They're like, well, vampires are cool, and we wanted to do something vampire-like for the original Ravenloft, but we didn't get a chance because the WotC source material wasn't there, and we did SMR instead. And I'm like, but counterpoint, we should really do the construct thing from the book because this is a module completely, almost entirely about constructs. And to which system says, counterpoint, vampires are cool. They're really cool. Ultimately, I couldn't argue with that. We're going to do Dhampir eventually, and we should do it as part of a Ravenloft. And nobody's going to complain that their Frankenstein has a side order of Dracula along with it, right? So that's the reason.
Cool. So we talk about Lamordia. You think about it's you think about Frankenstein, and it was written for 19th century kind of Eastern Europe, and so in the 5th edition especially, it has kind of a very almost a steampunk blend of science and that 19th century design. So how do we I was always curious how we challenges you might have faced to just drop that in the middle of this sword and sorcery fantasy world, and then all of a sudden we've got factories and steamboats and all of those things.
I mean, right. So it is weird, right? Because we have a game where firearms don't exist. People are running around in, frilly shirts and maybe saying thee and thou a lot. And now we're in a place where, it looks very much like a modern, it looks like a city you could go visit today. But it's not that weird because we're Dungeons and Dragons Online. you guys have been playing in Eberron for decades now, right? So, and Eberron is not necessarily steampunky, but it's magepunky. So a lot of that, you're in a more densely populated place with big city ideas and concepts. We'd already done that. It's just sort of the specific expression of the more modern thing that was different. What is actually interesting is that, like, if you think about it, the original novel came out in the early 1800s, but what you see in our expansion is really somewhere between 1880 and 1910. In other words, it's quote unquote the wrong era. But pop culture has sort of moved where Frankenstein is, thanks to the 1930s movies. If you watch the 1930s movies, like, it's really unclear when those things are taking place. Are they supposed to be taking place in 1930, or are they supposed to be taking place in 1880? You can't tell. The electrical equipment is like all from the 1920s. So Frankenstein has some really high-tech gear by the standards of the day. But he's in a sort of medieval Europe with villages and castles and whatnot. So there is this sort of imaginary, fictional 19th century Europe that we have in our brains, thanks to things like monster movies, and not just the Universal movies, but Hammer movies and things that came after the TV series Penny Dreadful, say, where we just mash all of these things that happened over, all these pieces of pop culture that happened over a 100-year time span, and put them as all happening at the same time. So, like, H.G. Wells novels, which are from the 1890s, happened at the same time as Mary Shelley, which is the beginning of the 19th century. It's a mashup, and that's what Dungeons and Dragons is, right? It takes all these different ideas from pop culture and just mashes them together to make something fun, which is a lot of the appeal on our side when we're making it. It's like, oh, cool, we get to put all these things together.
Right. Cool. Well, one of the things, of course, that we always see, and I love to see, especially in the new content, is what new monsters are we going to see. We got the of course, there's probably more. By the way, poltergeists are my nemesis. I was going through with my level 34 character with lots of past lives, and I thought it was really good until I hit one room that was full of poltergeists, and I think I wiped in like a second when I first started running this. So yeah, so they are my sworn enemy right now. But we had them, the brain in the jar obviously is cool, the Grimishkas, the Coal Light Walker, and then the Gallows Speaker is my favorite. I love those swirling skulls within the robe, and then I have to admit I wasn't real familiar with it until I kind of went and did the checked out the stat sheet. I was like, oh yeah, that's really cool. So how did you decide which monsters to include? There's so many options that could have gone there.
So we have, like a process. We've made a bunch of expansions by this point, so we have a sort of a process for it. The first thing is what is required for the story.
Yep.
Constructs were required for the story, so we're like, okay, we need constructs. Should we just use our existing flesh golems? And we're like, oh, we have the third edition flesh golems, which are like really distinctive because they have the strange things bolted to their hands and feet, but they don't quite say Frankenstein, in the way that we wanted for the expansion. So we made new flesh golems, basically, and the basic version of that does look like the 5th edition flesh golem. Well, we have, like, I think they're called prototype flesh golems in the visual. The ones just wandering around in loincloths. But then we're like, well, first off, we want to dress them up. We want to put them in fancy costumes so they look period appropriate, right? So we gave them suits and dresses. We made a female version, which we never had before, for flesh golems. And then we, by which I mean Torque, gave them gimmicks. So we don't just have flesh golems, we have ones that shoot electricity or are surrounded by poison or throw tombstones at you. And we also made them not flesh golems because another thing we did is another thing we think about when we're choosing monsters is like, how fun are these to fight? And if we did a pack that was crammed full of flesh golems, that would not be fun because golems are have certain stats that make them less fun to fight. So we made a new I forget what they're called. In terms of lore, we call them servitors.
Oh yeah,
flesh golems, and they have different stats. And if you mouse over them, they have a description of what their DDO classification is, which I do not remember. So we knew we were going to have a bunch of servitors. What else were we going to have? Well, Lamordia is cold, so we did research into monsters associated with cold. And we found like snowflake oozes, which were from the Icewind Dale 5th edition book, and the Cold Light Walker, which is from the 5th edition Icewind Dale book. We also were like, should we do a Remores? If we're going to do a Remores, this would be the time to do it because it's all about the cold. And then we looked into how much it would cost to make a Remores, and we're like, well, maybe instead of Remores, we'll do a Frostworm because we can do that using the purple worm as a base. So that's how we ended up with that monster in the pack. We're like, it's a time to do cold monsters, and that's a good cold monster. And then another thing we do when making expansions is just sit back and say, what classic D&D monsters would work in this pack that we don't currently have? So that's how, for example, for Mithranor, we got the Carrion Crawler, because we're like, we need some just monsters that are hanging out in the ruins, and we don't have carrion crawlers, and we should really get carrion crawlers because they're an iconic monster. And to fill that slot in Lamordia, we were originally looking at gibbering mouthers because of the whole body horror angle. And like, okay, those are the perfect body horror D&D monster. But again, how much does making a gibbering mouther cost? Well, maybe not. So we passed on the gibbering mouther and we made the Grick instead, which had been something we'd been thinking about making for a while, but had never quite made the cut. But we could, we could sell this as a body horror monster. And in our version of Lamordia, Victra has basically invented the Grick out of spare parts of zoo animals.
Mm-hmm.
The last category of monsters is things, I've talked about how we didn't do certain things because they're expensive. There are certain things we did do because they were cheap. So Poltergeist, for example, like we didn't have to ask artists for anything related to the Poltergeist. That was entirely me doing scripting to make them do what they do. And digging up the correct sound effects to make them sound as chilling as they are. I think the Snowflake Poltergeist might have been in the Icewind Dale book. I don't remember. But it just seemed like a good thing to have for a horror pack as Poltergeist.
Cool.
Oh, and then we also got monsters out of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. That includes the Gallows Speaker and the Grimishka. And another monster, which we'll talk about later.
Cool. Okay, so there's one question I've just got on the Gricks. Why are they Gricklings and not Gricks? Is there was
So Basically a lively debate about how big a Grick is.
Okay.
And because opinions vary, and Catania was of the opinion that they were, in fact, the size that they are in the Wish. And I'm like, no, they're more like as tall as a human. So we compromised and we said, okay, the smaller ones are Gricklings.
Makes sense. I just figured there has to be Papa and Mama Gricks running around somewhere. We've got all these Gricklings here. So, but I guess we could,
Well,
if they're created
in
by
Lamordia, it's actually Lamordia. It's unclear how they reproduce if they were in fact made by Victra. You'd have to ask her.
True. So then I guess we're talking about what we have included. I guess the next flip side of that is what wasn't included. I mean, when I look through the content, and one of the things I think I even wrote a little article about it in my lore of DDO column in on the forums, but there's this big syndicate of enlightened citizens that are that are so anti-magic, and they're pro science, and we have to strike out the arcane, and then we've also got the there's so much more to Lamordia with and I'm gonna screw this name up badly, New Furstenberg or whatever the other huge city is over there. Was there a reason why you guys focused on like one city and kind of didn't expand to the land the way like we did we're familiar with other Ravenloft, where we kind of traveled the whole realm?
Yeah, although if you think about it, Barovia is really just a mountain valley done at scale. It's not actually that big of a place. It's not, Lamordia in the book is bigger than Barovia in the sense that it has two cities. But yeah, we didn't do the Lamordia as it's described in the book, which is an entire country with two major cities and like a bunch of wilderness in between them. Why didn't we do that? Well, the answer is a combination of time and quality. Making two cities would be very time consuming. And when it came to, say, Mythdraenor, we made exactly the map of Mythdraenor that was in the box set. But that was probably too much. There was too much landscape in Mythdraenor. And we were like, what if instead of doing that, we just focused on a smaller area for Lamordia? And something I haven't talked about is like how we made up the story. Again, Van Richten's guide doesn't have an entire story, it just has ideas for a story. We made up the part where it's explicitly said that Lamordia is under an endless winter, and that's because of the Dark Lord's curse. It's kind of hinted at in the previous Lamordia stuff that the reason Lamordia is so cold and snowy is because the Dark Powers are displeased. But it's never actually said. We made that explicit. But once we had decided that there was an endless winter that was part of Victra's curse, we're like, well, that explains why Ludendorff, the city we did, why Ludendorff is cut off from the rest of Lamordia, because literally they're snowed in. They can't get to the other places. So we cut out most of Lamordia, most of the geography of Lamordia, for the expansion, just to so we could focus. There's a bunch of other stuff we cut, like there's some things that we just never explained, kind of because we ran out of time. Hopefully some of that is self-explanatory. Like in The Wish, where you retrace Victra's footsteps when she was making her deal with the Dark Powers. We don't explain why these doors are closed but you could open them, or why the way across the valley was closed to Victra the first time, but those platforms appear to you when you arrive, or why you're seeing those visions. Like we never come out and explain why that's going on. Mm-hmm. That is because the Dark Powers want you to have this information. The Dark Powers want you to track down Victra. The Dark Powers want you to defeat Victra, because you, the adventurers, are part of Victra's punishment from the Dark Powers. And there's like a reference to that in one of the Baron's journals where he's like, he's aware that Lamordia is under a curse, but he doesn't know the exact form of the curse. So he's like, are the adventurers the curse?
Right.
Are they the curse made flesh? And he's right. I mean, you are. That is part of every Ravenloft realm, is that adventurers show up and take down the Dark Lord, and that's part of the plan. Part of the plan of the Dark Powers, because that is part of the Dark Lord's punishment. And this happens, eternally. Victra will reappear in Lamordia and then be taken down again by another group of adventurers later.
Cool.
In terms of stuff we cut, there's a reference to how dangerous it is to work on the fishing fleet, which is just part of being a commercial fisherman. It is in the real world a dangerous job. But in the book, it's actually more dangerous because the sea outside Ludendorff is populated with giant leviathans that attack fishing boats, which we don't mention because, again, we ran out of time.
Well, of course, and you can't include everything, of course, So,
right,
and of course, we as fans of the game want everything, but I understand.
right.
So, one of the things that you talk about the winter, one of what I've heard people comment on when I've streamed it, and actually when it was run at PAX West, was the music, and and how that kind of fits together with the lighting and the weather effects. And you talked about using some of the themes from the old monster movies or even the new monster movies in Nosferatu. How do the art departments, composers, and script, how does this all work together to create this one cool, really feeling that you're in this frozen city?
So, we come up with lists of reference materials at the start. For any art history nerds who might be watching, like our visual reference from the time are the paintings of Caspar David Friedrich, who's a German romantic painter. His most famous paintings are of a guy standing over sort of a misty abyss and an iceberg. But the point is, once you've identified that sort of reference point, you can show that to the artist and say that's the mood we're looking for. And if you look at like the sun in the landscape, like that's where that is coming from. And movies. I already mentioned Nosferatu. For the music, because DDO jumps around to all these different settings, we take that as an opportunity to do all kinds of different music. So we very intentionally don't have a set style for our music, particularly in the in the expansions. But we had to figure out like what is the style for Lamordia, and sort of one possible answer is, well, the music from those 1930s monster movies, but that would it would be very sort of generically Hollywood, and it wouldn't like have its own feeling. It would just feel like we're doing Hollywood soundtrack. So Bill Champagne and I, Bill's the composer, put our heads into this, and we're like, what is sort of what is a quintessential sound of a 19th century town, industrial town? That like we could build a sound for Lamordia off of. And what we eventually came up with was like a brass band. There's a bandstand outside Ludendorff City Hall. And in the 19th century, brass bands were all the thing. People would like belong to brass bands, like they belong to soccer clubs or soccer teams or softball teams today. They go out on the weekend and practice their practice playing at the brass band. And the type of brass band music we decided would act as our model for Lamordia is the hymn. Uh, the one of the themes you'll hear in the music is a hymn called "There Is a Fountain Full of Blood,"
Ooh,
which is the most Ravenloft name you could possibly imagine. Uh, but it's a very beautiful melody, and sounds great when played by like a quartet of brass instruments. But this being Lamordia, then the instruction to Bill was take this melody and break it, because that is the characteristic of everything in Ravenloft. Everything is broken. The Dark Lord has broken the world, so nothing is quite right. And as a consequence, instead of hearing like beautiful, perfect harmonies in the music in Lamordia, everything is slightly off. Uh, and we know that this drives certain people crazy.
right.
Like there are some people who hear the music in Lamordia are like, oh, I'm always on edge because it doesn't sound right, and it isn't right. It is in fact off, but it's intentionally off to put you on edge because this is the horror update. Uh,
That's cool. That's cool. Well, I'm
and
sorry.
oh,
Yes.
while we're on music, I should mention in The Wish, if you listen to the music in The Wish, it is still Lamordia brass music, so it fits in there. But it's playing the themes from Barovia. So the melody is from Barovia because it's the Dark Powers. We've decided that is the Dark Powers theme.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Now, the other thing that I was struck by is, of course, in Ravenloft we had, obviously Castle Ravenloft was the big centerpiece, and here obviously we've got Schloss Mordenheim, and I know people can't see that at home, but I just pulled this and it says a reference there from the Adam's Wrath module that's out there. What kind of inspirations guided that the visual and architectural design to make that thing so. I mean, the multiple floors and all of that really make it a cool adventure.
So yeah, we have two, unlike Barovia, where we had a castle, and this one we have two
Right.
castles, one of which is the Baron's and one of which is Dr. Mordheim's. And for and we kind of split up the functions. We didn't really like have a conscious plan to do this. This is just how it ended up. We kind of split up the functions of Castle Ravenloft into two parts. Victra got the sort of big, sprawling, non-linear dungeon where you go back and forth part, and also got sort of the spooky castle part. And the Baron got the you're invited to dinner, and part of it seems like it might be just that, an
Mm-hmm.
invitation to dinner um, bit. And hopefully got two different experiences out of it. Um, During the Baron's Castle, so there's a lot of stuff. We have a vision in our head of what we want to do, and then there's what we can actually do in the time allotted. And like, if we had more time in the Baron's case, there might have been more pointing out the before and after of your trip to the Baron's castle, where you go there initially at a very nice party, then you get rug pulled and thrown into a dungeon, and you fight your way out, leaving a trail of corpses behind. Uh, then you come back and have to go through your trail of corpses and uh, go up and actually meet the Baron. Like, if we had more time, you would have actually gone back to the great hall of the uh, castle and seen like what the post-party uh, environment was there. But we just ran out of time.
Well, I mean, time is always the resource that there's never enough of. That's for sure. And you talk about the architecture. One thing, there's another player who may actually be in the stream. Float and I were running through this the other day. We noticed the staircases, particularly. Now, I've been in lots of old buildings where, and as a matter of fact, there's a
Yeah.
whole site on Facebook called Death Stairs that are stairs in buildings with these little narrow stairs and these steep things. Was that intentional? Because I sure makes me feel like I'm in an old building when I'm in there.
Oh,
There's a few options
oh,
there, but
yeah, so it is having the effect we want it to have. It should feel
mm-hmm.
narrow and unsafe.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent.
but ultimately, though, those are Wayloon stairs. Uh,
Okay.
so in other words, it's a pre-existing asset that we reused to our advantage. Um, there's a lot of stuff in this expansion which is way more realistic than we normally are. So things like, and relatively few people have actually noticed this. We literally have a narrower cell set, a narrower hallways in a lot of this pack than we normally have. Like the first quest you play, those slum buildings, the hallways are much
Mm-hmm.
narrower than normal. We got a whole new cell set to do that with, um, because because that's what an actual slum building would have, right? You wouldn't have a 30-foot wide hallway, which is what our standard hallway is. Uh, you would have a narrow hallway, and because narrow is good for horror, right?
Right.
If you're in a 30-foot hallway, it feels very wide open and relaxed. But if you're in a realistically scaled hallway, it feels much more oppressive.
Cool. Yep.
So something like that stairwell that you have up on screen, that is uh, something you would see in a unsafe 19th century building, and feels right for a horror game that we would make you go up that. Uh, Although, of course, in DDO, like the consequences of falling off is
Yeah.
nothing.
By the way, I have to point out that I was happy to see handrails. Those seem to be missing in most staircases throughout the realm. So that was great to see too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There are handrails, but they do nothing.
Yeah, they look
You'll
nice.
you'll pop right over them.
Well, that explains a lot too. I thought it was cool when I stumbled upon this Vistani camp in Lamordia because
Yeah,
it was really cool to kind of bring it
go ahead.
together. There is this cohesive feel, and and we learned they can move through the mists at will. So there they are, here. So, was there any other thoughts on like how you make this more cohesive with the rest of Lamordia?
Well, right. That's another example of stuff that got cut because we ran out of time. So originally, there was going to be a lot more to the Vistani in the sense that Madame Eva was going to be one of the quest
Oh,
givers,
cool.
and there was going to be something to do with the Taroka cards. We hadn't gotten to the point of figuring it out um, when we had to cut it. But we decided to keep the Vistani camp in just because that is the sort of thing you would find in Ravenloft, is you would just find the Vistani showing up here and there. Um, and we will probably make more Ravenloft content in the future, in which case uh, having people who illustrate how you can move between the domains of dread, or demi-planes of dread, um, is useful. But yeah, um, again, originally that was going to be much more than what you see there. Uh,
It was cool to see. I was happy to see it. Other thing I noticed too was, and of course, I was thrilled when I walked in the library and I saw Mary Shelley and her
right.
her companions there. You got what John Polidori and Percy Shelley,
Yep.
Lord Byron. I think there's another one somewhere else. It was pretty cool. So and a lot of the past content has had secrets. Are there maybe some secrets that we haven't encountered yet that might be
Well, I
out
mean,
there?
yeah, there's a secret. There's a secret that everybody's encountered, but nobody has put two and two together to say what it is. So those, as you say, that's Mary Shelley, who's talking to John Polidori, who wrote the first English language vampire story. Uh, Frankenstein basically is the result of a bet where they agreed while telling ghost stories that they were going to write their own
Mm-hmm.
ghost story. Um, and in our version, like Mary is saying, modern the products of modern science are much more terrifying than mere vampires. Yeah, there we go. Exactly.
Yeah. By the way, also shown as Branwen. She didn't write anything. That's my character, my bard.
If you're wondering where the endless winter comes from originally, like why snow is so important in Lamordia lore, it's because when Mary Shelley and John Polidori were having this conversation in the real world, it was, I think it was 1813, the year without a winter. There was, due to a volcanic eruption in Asia in 1813, it was extremely cold, and it would literally snow in Europe in June, leading to famine, which is where part of the story for Lamordia comes from. So what we did is we took that idea and we turned it up to 11 and said, this curse has resulted in endless winter and hence intense famine. Anyways, talking about Easter eggs, another Easter egg is two of the quest givers, the Finster brothers, who are a pair of folklorists who know about the Dark Powers Temple. And do you know who they are?
I do not.
Pair of brothers in fictional Germany collecting folklore.
Oh,
they're the Brothers Grimm.
Okay.
So they are our version of the Brothers Grimm, collecting folklore. Being the first ones to actually write it all down. And there's a lot of terrible, I won't call them puns, there's a lot of terrible German references in this, where like some of the people on the team know some German, I know some German, Tolera knows some German. So like Finster is kind of sort of a synonym for grim in German. And like there's the vampire optional in the University Quest. The guy who's consulting with them on undead. What's his name? His name is Max Entsetzen. And Entsetzen is another word for fear or terror. The guy who played the monster in the original silent movie version of Nosferatu was Max Schreck, and Schreck is German for terror. So again, it's a reference. Again, and if you're probably a native German speaker, a lot of it sounds pretty weird, but it's us having fun.
Cool. Okay, and of course I have to ask about, we talked about this before we came on stream, this wax museum. It's out there just in the middle of the city, and it's elaborate and it's cool. And I guess all we really get out of it is, the little box that tells us on the flyer, Moloch's Edifying Waxworks. Of course, I go looking through Lamordia Warlow and I don't find anything about Moloch.
Nope.
So
you will not. So this is related to the raid that is coming. So, again, this is a whole bunch of classic horror tropes that we're doing here. And one of the classic horror trope is wax museums. And we're also doing stuff from Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I believe you were going to ask me about something else at the end of the last quest.
We could jump into that.
An unexplained thing in the last quest.
This fella.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's two unexplained things in the last quest.
You talk about the juggernaut that charges through the wall, or am I missing something else? Okay.
Right. So yes, you correctly pointed out that there is another Easter egg in the last quest, which is Adam, that's the name of the scientist's main monster in the second edition, Lamordia. And we, just for fun, we gave it as the name of one of Victra's helper servitors in the capstone, where Adam is basically part of her escape plan. So she designates Adam to wait for her when she's trying to escape from the castle. There's another second edition reference which you might recognize, which is the Medusa
Yes.
optional on the Isle of Agony, which again is the Medusa from the second edition version.
Yeah.
Um,
Anthea or Althea.
anyways,
Yeah, something like that.
yep. Yeah, Althea. Yeah. Who is also in the second edition Isle of Agony, and just gets a little cameo here. Another thing you find in the last quest is you come into a room where there's a mysterious figure on a slab that gets up and charges out of the room, and you're like, "What the hell was that?"
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, in the Wish, there's a section where Victor comes across uh, somebody in some armor who's frozen. I think they're frozen. I don't remember. But she's found something strange.
Yes.
Um, and this is all, related to the raid.
Cool.
Which spoilers, will be about a wax museum and a relentless juggernaut, which is a monster from this book.
Cool.
That is also something that changed considerably during development. We had some other ideas. At one point, there was a Jack the Ripper like serial killer striking in Lamordia, so you'd find crime scenes. But again, we ran out of time.
That's cool. Cool. All right. Well, I know we're at an hour. I'm gonna scroll through these questions real quick and maybe kind of rapid fire some of the ones that we may have had that are on tone. So if I don't answer yours, I apologize. Jump back in and that's me. All right. One of the first questions we had was okay, you can't say Chill of Ravenloft. What was your favorite X Pack personally is that you were involved in?
They're like my children. I love them all equally.
Okay, well there you go.
So one that I had a lot of fun working on was Masterminds of Sharn, because I mean, yeah. So sorry. I think my favorite expansion is Barovia.
Mm-hmm. Mine too.
Because both it's an excellent book. It's like probably the best adventure book for Dungeons and Dragons ever, the fifth edition one, and because it allowed, as it happens, all of the chapters of it are basically set up as DDO dungeons. They are specific geographic locations and more or less self-contained areas that work as DDO quests. So for us, that was kind of a luxury, where normally you guys only ever see like the second draft of a quest, because we'd only have time to do like two drafts. We do an initial version, then we look at it, then we revise it, and that's the version you guys see, warts and all. But in the case of Barovia, we were starting from a pre-existing book where everything was sort of done to DDO's scale and style to begin with. And that meant we had way more time to refine stuff and polish stuff than we get in a lot of other expansions where we have to, make up things ourselves.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, making up things yourselves is fun, and Masterminds of Sharn is an example of that, where the Sharn book does not contain a storyline, does not contain a big main villain, does not contain like a map of the cogs that is useful for, adventuring.
Mm-hmm.
We had to make all that stuff up, and it was fun to make up an antagonist that, like worked for Sharn, and who was a satisfying antagonist, but like was just a guy.
Yep.
As opposed to a god or some sort of powerful monster.
Very annoying guy too, but yeah, that's his his intent, so that's good. All right, Mordic asked, and this kind of goes back to the creation of why we picked Lamordia. Was there any thought of Aslan and his realm, since he came through Barovia and Strahd first, or?
Sorry, say again. You
Okay.
cut out there.
All right. He said, again, I don't know this lore, so I'm just going straight by the question. Was it a consideration like Aslan and his realm since he came through Barovia first?
Drawing a
Yeah, I am
blank.
too. So maybe if you get more
Uh,
information there, Mordek, if you're still on,
yeah,
fill us in because
I need I need the cliff the wiki
yeah,
notes.
and I'm not familiar with it either. Let's see here. All right, there was a comment, and this may be for more for the art department. Is we need some more actual dresses, and this would be a perfect place now that we're in Lamordia, for characters to wear. So I guess we can pass that pass that along.
Yep, yep.
Um,
Although it was fun. It was fun to get like actual 19th century clothes.
yes.
Uh, and the artists had a lot of fun making those hats.
Mm-hmm. They were cool. And I ordered a bowler, but I haven't gotten it yet for me to wear on stream when I play it. All right. And this is a good question. I didn't ask this, and I know we're running out of time, so we can just rapid fire these. You know, how did you choose the dark gifts? I know, I think, some of the Steel Star was involved in too, but
Yeah, yeah. Torque and Steelstar chose the dark gift, so I don't actually know.
okay. I imagine it's probably the same kind of thing. What can we implement within the realms of what we already have without having to go and invent a whole new system? Let me see. Okay, Aslan was the Archmage Lich that got pulled into Ravenloft from Greyhawk, and he was an apprentice arrival to
Oh,
Strahd. So,
okay.
okay. All right, cool. And then I guess another question. Let me see. We Sukai asks, you made it. The content is level 8 at heroic. Just kind of curious. I guess this goes to the question about where we pick those in general. The question was, at 15 you could have jumped in with the new iconic and started running it. Is there like a quick answer on how you guys arrived at these level ranges when you put stuff out, or?
Not There's never a quick answer because it always depends on a variety of factors. So, you know, I have notions about where it fits in terms of the story. Uh, Torque has notions about where it fits in terms of like the leveling curve for heroic, and then Steel Star has notions about where it belongs in terms of the loot.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, it's a negotiation. Uh, so you know, it's level 8, and it's a little bit weird because it makes it come quote unquote before Barovia. But
Rude.
on the other hand, like look, the Ravenloft stories are totally independent of each other, so there's no reason why it shouldn't come before Barovia, except for the fact that Barovia was the first in the real world, the
Interesting.
first Ravenloft story.
Interesting. Another addition. Aslan Rex is the Dark Lord of Darkon, so that's the area that was okay.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. I know Darkon, but I didn't remember the name. Um, we looked at doing Darkon, but there's just too much stuff there. It's too big. It's like an entire campaign setting. Um, and is Darkon the one with the gimmick where you have amnesia? That is hard to pull off in DDO.
Yeah, I don't know.
Um,
Cool. All right. Well, I guess that kind of wraps up our questions. Is there anything else you want to add that I didn't ask, maybe that we didn't hit on? That
I'm trying to think of like fascinating facts about Lamordia you don't know. Uh,
of course we'll know them if you tell us. Which is.
no, I can't think of anything
Okay.
offhand. Other than like the puzzle with the pointing electrical devices is literally the same puzzle um, as the pointing statues in
Mm-hmm.
Mithranor, because we actually made it a smart way where we can just replace assets.
Oh, that's cool.
So if that seemed familiar, that's because it was.
Yeah. Well, I connected the familiarity, but that's cool that it can be kind of placed out there in different ways. That's cool. All right. Well, Knockback, thank you so much. As this all came together pretty quickly, and this has been amazing. So
Yep,
I appreciate you very much. Thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
my
Okay,
pleasure. Great to
folks,
talk
I'm
to
going
you.
to jump back over just to the run the stream again, so I can thank Knockback. We'll be right back here in just a moment. We'll see you guys here in just a bit.